the second work, the gender gap in school to university transition in Italy, insight from the integration between INVALSI and Anagrafe Nazionale Studenti Data Science. Gabriele Lombardi, Valentina Tocchioni, Samuele Miloni, University of Florence.
Yes, thank you. Hello everyone, I am Gabriele Lombardi and will present this joint work with Valentina Tocchioni and Samuele Milone about the gender gap in school to university transition in Italy. Let's start just highlighting very quickly why it is useful to talk about gender gap in university enrollment. This is a widely investigated topic, and what we know in general is that luckily we can see a long increasing trend in women's university enrollment, and we also know that this trend is not just by enrollment, but that women usually in university tend to outperform male, and this can be considered also an advantage during selection procedures. And nonetheless, studies about European countries highlight that this long trend has brought only a roughly equal representation in enrollment, and with some differences also depending by fields of studies, for example. When we talk about Italy, we can see actually kind of a nice picture where females have higher enrollment rates and lower dropout rates. This is especially in the south of Italy, and we can see also that in the decade between 2012 and 2021, the female entry rate nonetheless reduced by 1 percentage point. Nonetheless, we are consistently above the European average, especially in some fields such as art and humanities and health studies. As well known, female enrollment is quite low in STEM field. Nonetheless, also in this case, Italy performs above the European average, which is still kind of a good news. So what's the aim of our research is to assess the school to university transition rate looking at upper secondary schools in Italy. So our hypothesis is that gender inequalities in access to higher education system could derive from the persistence and transmission of gender disparities, and this can depend by socioeconomic conditions, territories, or types of upper secondary schools. So what we are going to propose now is just a descriptive statistics that for us is a stepstone for future research on this point, and our aim is to identify schools and university degree programs that show gender balanced enrollments and verify if they may depend on several factors. So as a first descriptive steps in this work, we create school level indicators that try to take into account the gender composition of students enrolled in the university. So I will be very quick in presenting the data, thanks to Andrea that did the majority of the job for me in the previous presentation. We have basically the same data source, so the integration between INVALSI data and the data from the Student National Register that we obtained from the Ministry of University. We look at high school students, more than 400,000 students that graduates in the school year 18-19, and then in the academic year 19-20 we can look at more than 200,000 of these students that decide to enroll in the university. So we don't have self-selection in this case. So what we do is to aggregate students into school. Just in order to have more clean data, we exclude schools with fewer than 15 observations, losing more or less than 2% of observation. And all the indicators I'm going to present to you are calculated at the school level. So on the left side of this slide, we can see three indicators of entry rate. So we can calculate the overall entry rate, the female entry rate, and the male entry rate, which are the percentage of students or both genders, or just female or males, that enroll in the university over the total number of students. While on the right side we can see two indicators that focus on those students who actually enroll in the university. So the first one is the gender gap, where we calculate the excess of female students enrolled in the university over the percentage of male students. And so it is an indicator that moves from minus 100% to plus 100%. So if it says 0, there's no gender gap, and so males and females are equally represented. If it's plus 100%, all females are enrolled. While the other index, which is very interesting also in order to identify some kind of peer effect in the decision of university enrollment by students, is the concentration index, which basically takes into account the number of students of a same school who choose the same university. In a nutshell, if this concentration index is 0, is at the limit, it would mean that all the student in a certain school moves toward a different university. While if it's 100%, it means that all the students of this school have enrolled in the exact same university. So, let's look at the first result. In this case, we'll show a distinction by macro-region of high school. So the distinction is between students who attended the high school in Northwest, Northeast, Center, South and Island of Italy. And we can notice how the university entry rate is higher in the Central and Northern region and lower in Southern Island. What is common to all the macro region is that constantly with what we know from the literature, the entry rate value is higher for females than for males, and the highest female entry rate show up for the center of Italy. While looking at the gender gap, in this case we have a quite homogeneous picture across macro region. Nonetheless, we can notice that the only two macro regions exhibiting a mean level of the gender gap above the 8%, while the overall mean is about 7.63%, are Northwest and South, in which it seems that the entry rate of the share of females particularly outperforms the share of males. Looking at the concentration, we discover something very interesting, which will be consistent also in the other certification that we are going to propose. And this is the fact that the concentration index is consistently higher for males than for females. So in some sense, this opened the way in order to exploring if, in some sense, males needs more the effect of their peer in order to decide if and where going to the university. And this is very consistent as a result. The concentration is also particularly high for students from the islands, and my opinion that should be investigated is that students from the islands has less accessible university, so it's like they have less available choice with regard to students that are already in the continent, and so they can easily reach all the universities available. On the contrary, Southerners are those who seem less affected by the choice of their peers, and I think this can be attributed to the fact that Southerners have very internalized the fact of moving for higher education studies, but they have much more accessible choices with regard to, for example, their island peers. Just a very quick picture of a regional distinction, because it's quite homogeneous for the indicators. What I want to point out is that, for example, for the female entry rate, we have a much darker picture, so the entry rate is higher than the one of males in all the regions. with a particular strong effect for Abruzzo, Marche and Basilicata, while the picture for males is quite homogeneous for all the one. And another particular thing is the particularly high concentration index, both for females, males and total, for some regions such as Liguria, Tuscany and Piedmont, which is something that for me is very interesting in order to be investigated. Looking at the high school curriculum, also in this case, we still confirm that the female entry rate is higher than the male entry rate and that gender gap is generally positive. What is interesting is to look at the fact that classical and scientific lyceum, which are the most academic track that we have in our high school system, exhibit the highest entry rate, but also the most high gender balance in the gender gap. While the picture dramatically changes when we look, for example, at the technological and vocational school, where they have very low entry rates, a very high gender gap. So among those students who decided to enroll in this kind of high school, if someone goes to the university, they are especially females, but they're also, with regard to their peers, also a much higher variability. So we can look that we have some schools who have a gender gap almost at 100%, but also some schools who have a gender gap at minus 50%. So a much higher heterogeneity in this kind of school where it's less common to decide to enroll at the university. This is very interesting. While the concentration index, I will skip in this case, we don't have nothing particularly interesting, if not what we have already discovered, that concentration is higher for males. The last very interesting result is looking at the SES quartile. The SES is the indicator computed by INVALSI for economic, social and cultural status, and in this case we can see that looking at the entry rate, as much as we move from low to high quartiles of the SES, we can see an increase in the entry rate. While as much we move from low to high quartiles of the SES, the gender gap constantly decreases. So students from the high socioeconomic status are those who enroll much more at the university and which they exhibit less gender differences, while for the low socioeconomic status are still females who dominate in the decision to enroll in the university. And it's also kind of interesting what happens looking at the concentration index. Those who comes from the lowest socioeconomic condition are those who exhibit the highest concentration index. So apparently what I think can be argued from this picture is that those who comes from the lowest socioeconomic condition are also those who needs much more the support of their peers in order to be guided in the decision to go to university and tend to follow their peers in the same university that they decide to choose, and this can be explored much more in further research. So, just to conclude, we depicted a very interesting picture of the gender differences in the rate of the enrollment at the university. We can observe a general pattern with high values on average in the center and lower values in the north and south of Italy, and with the university participation less common within center university pathways, but these pathways with less university participation are also those who amplificate the gender gap in favor of the women. The same stratification we can observe looking at the concentration, so where we have the most disadvantaged context, it increases the need of follow their peers in some university. This research needs further development that try to put together all these elements in a single investigation that put together all these factors, and this couldn't be possible without the fundamental integration of these two data sources, which are the INVALSI data that gives us a clear picture of what happens in the secondary education system, and the student national register that helps us to connect to the tertiary education system. And this is also thanks to the project that makes possible to conduct this research. So thank you very much for your attention.